In this video, we're going to take a look at the variant of the Trench Pilgrims, the War Pilgrimage of St. Methodius, building 700 Ducat beginning of campaign list. Following up previous videos where I laid out a warband for each faction based on the model selection provided in Kickstarter, we're going to go a bit more freeform here and discuss the variant warbands available as of writing to the various factions. In this series of videos, I'll be going over various variants for the factions, discussing unique elements of said warband, equipment, units, etc., how this changes your strategy, and then provide an example list similar to the previous videos. I want to preface this with a couple things though. First off, if you're looking at variants, I assume you already know how to base faction plays, and so won't rehash everything I've said in previous videos about them, only talking about the differences in the variant to provide in order to save time. So check out earlier videos if need be. Second is these are not going to be as optimized as standard lists from a pure number standpoint, sacrificing some elements of efficiency for the sake of playing into the variant's flavor. They'll still have rationale behind them, but there's plenty of areas where I'll say grab one more of the unique units or something over something marginally better. I figure this is fine since if you're playing these variants, you're likely more attracted to the flavor and trying to make use of the unique mechanics available. So, in this video, we're focusing on the War Pilgrimage of St. Methodius, referred to as Methodius from here on. This variant of the Trench Pilgrims focuses on the technology end of the faction, namely in having multiple shrines, upgrades for said shrines, and more automatic weaponry available for their units. The standard Trench Pilgrims notoriously suffer from ranged combat, having both poor advanced ranged options, preferring to focus on melee and near melee options. Methodius turns this around a bit, giving the faction options that are some of the longest range guns in the game, and popular medium to long range options such as the submachine gun and automatic rifle. There's a host of upgrades that allow you to further specialize your anchorite shrines, making the already intimidating units even more fearsome. This variant is for you if you really want them to be your centerpiece units even more so than they normally are. We first gotta discuss what the anchorite shrine normally is in the first place before we discuss their improvements in order to have proper context. In general, these units are considered one of the better complete package large units, not just for utility, but especially with how they can synergize with the Trench Pilgrim's revival mechanics. First off, you have your standard movement, a good melee statistic, and a standard -3 armor for units of this type. Note that this used to be machine armor, but is no longer, so you can't ignore the down states anymore. It comes equipped with a combat helmet, which is a nice bonus over most units of the type since most of them lack any keyword immunity items, and 2 weapons. The first weapon is the Catherine Wheel, which comes with an accuracy bonus and is a bloodbath roll by default. This makes it very good not just against armor, but also against unarmored chaff as well, as most of the time AP weapons can feel real bad when you're forced to use it on an unarmored target, since you still need to roll 9 either way. This is followed up by the Bonebreaker Mace, which is basically just a greatsword, but without critical. If the wheel fails to kill, it'll likely down the target, so this mace usually has a +2 injury dice in practice when focus firing, and is still a good option for lashing out against secondary targets. These both do have the keyword risky though, so while it usually won't come up, at some point you will miss the wheel and not get the follow-up mace attack. Onto the traits. This unit obviously has tough, strong, and fear, as do pretty much any unit of this type, but also has unique ability in broken on the wheel. It's a lot of text, but basically it boils down to sacrificing a unit at the beginning of the game to act as a meat shield for the shrine, increasing its durability a bit, although you do give up the shrine's armor value for avoiding blood markers, but in practice this is usually worth it, as it's one more kill roll needed to take place on your unit. In the metagame though, this ability is very useful for the Pilgrims, as it basically allows you to actively generate Martyr Penitence, which is one of the strongest things Trench Pilgrims can do in the long term, especially in certain warband variants such as Sacred Affliction, where that -1 injury dice gets exceedingly powerful. So, what do we get with Methodius? As already mentioned, we gain access to extra shrine, and an armory for said shrines. We'll discuss these specifics in a bit. The variant loses 3 huge things. First off is that we completely lose the functionality of breaking units on the wheel, which hurts shrine durability and the viability of buying ecclesiastic prisoners since they can't even suicide bomb in this variant. We lose communicants, which more or less gets their role filled by the second shrine in most cases, but very notably this cuts down the number of natural elite units this warband can take to only 2. So you'll be relying on promotion rolls even more so than usual for filling out your elites. This loss even extends to mercenary, so no anti-tank communicant either, which does also hurt the mercenary options, but Trench Pilgrims already have access to a lot of mercenaries in the first place, and has a good glory shop, so this isn't as devastating as it could be. The last big thing they're losing out is on a key feature of the faction, Martyr Penitence, which is undeniably large loss, but does change up the incentive structure quite a bit from other Trench Pilgrim lists. Stigmatic Nuns also have a change where they must have standard armor, so effectively just a price increase, but not truly since you are paying for something you'd likely get at some point anyways. Reduction in cap for the unit too, but not by much. More importantly though, we get machine guns, automatic rifle, and submachine gun access for the standard price, which is a very nice boon. Shield combo with multiple attacks is nice, and having just one more viable long-range option means fewer units are spending entire turns just moving and nothing else. Combined with incendiary ammo, one can set up huge damage for the heavier weaponry this warband has access to. As mentioned, the shrine gains access to new weaponry in this variant that they can sacrifice the breaking wheel for. Note that this is the result of replacing the breaking wheel. All of these items are actually quite expensive on top of their base price, and are competing with a comparatively free melee bloodbath. So internalize that not getting one of these weapons is by no means a bad choice, and is a cost-effective way of getting a second shrine into your warband, especially early campaign. Briefly, there's 3 weapons that we're already familiar with: the heavy flamethrower, anti-material rifle, and the punt gun. None of these are all that exciting except the anti-material rifle in my opinion, as it has good range, AP, and importantly only costs glory rather than ducats, so it doesn't count towards the limit. If taking it, you basically end up with a replacement anti-tank communicant that's a little bit more durable. More interesting, though, are the unique weapons, starting with the trench mortar. This is the longest range artillery attack in the game, tied with the Sultanate Grand Cannon, meaning outside of turn 1, you're more likely firing inside of short range, and ignoring cover with point targeting. That means that with an upgraded range stat, the worst you'll be firing at is a flat roll, excluding blood markers in play, of course. This is pretty solid, but when you consider that it has the standard artillery near miss mechanic, means that you do not even need to roll a 7 to actually hit your target, which gets even better when you realize this weapon does not have a direct hit bonus, so you're free to use the point target to optimize number of targets over hitting a singular target. Consequently, this is not your boss killer weapon like most artillery, but rather is specialized in crippling clusters of low to mid tier units very early in the game. Fire immunity is rare, so very often you're getting 2 blood markers out of every unit that's hit, and a +1 injury dice means that none to lightly armored units are at a decent chance of getting killed outright, and very likely are ending up downed all the way back in the deployment zone. Those that survive are now set up to fail their next dash activations by spending blood markers, which can be absolutely crucial to the game momentum on turn 1. Usually, the lack of boss killing feature would be a huge downside for your set piece unit, but for the pilgrims, access to the anti-tank hammer helps smooth this pain out a lot. The autocannon is generally considered one of, if not the best optional weapon, as 3 extended range siege Giselle shots and 1 activation provides immense map presence. The OK range stat of the shrine is significantly mitigated by the fact that there's 3 shots, meaning you're likely to hit at least 1, and even a single shot is nothing to sneeze at even for armored units. If a unit is downed in the sightline of this gun, it's very likely dead, as 4 injury dice without any blood markers spent is scary enough, and likely capable of bloodbathing by the 3rd shot for an immense highest 3 of 5 dice. Just briefly, almost never take the option to shoot 5 times. You literally need 4 successful consecutive rolls before you see any benefit from it, which, for a close range, no cover with enhanced accuracy, only has about 42% chance of occurring, and run not the insignificant chance of ending your turn before the 3rd shot even comes out. If you have height as well to this open field unit, sure, go for it, but beware a savvy opponent will spend blood markers here to try and force an early end to this fearsome activation. Trying to do this with neutral rolls to hit only has an 11% chance of getting the 4th shot, with significant risk along the way. The gas sensor is the last weapon, and while thematically very cool, in practice comes out to be a bit of an unwieldy, multi-target regular flamethrower at best. Any unit with armor that you care about using AP weapons on is likely to have a gas mask, drastically reducing the performance of this weapon. Friendly fire means that this shrine is usually isolated, and cover negating the armor penetration effect is pretty crippling, especially with things like the new heavy ballistic shields, which more or less insulate what would be one of the ideal targets from this. There's a hefty chunk of the board that is controlled by this weapon though, so that is something. As you get later in the campaign and even more mid-tier units are getting kitted in gas masks, this weapon really nosedives. It can be really cool in some contrived circumstances, but overall rules are a bit rough for this weapon in my opinion. Now for the unique equipment the shrines can equip, up to 2 of each. These function similarly to many of the upgrade variants tend to feature for their centerpiece units, but very notably, as these are equipment, not upgrades, you are free to swap these around between shrines as desired. This is especially important for one upgrade in particular, but let's just go through them all. Gas filters and sacred geometry are very basic, just flat out upgrades. Gas filters help against AP gas weapons, obviously, and ranged upgrade is nearly required if you plan on taking the ranged options, such as the autocannon or anti-material rifle, as you want those investments to actually hit their targets. The Holy Diesel engine is a cool one that allows you to get a very useful +2 dice to dash at the cost of a blood marker each time you use it. This is just great since it allows you to generally get into charging distance at least one turn earlier than you typically would, which, with the Shrine, usually translate into at least one more kill under its belt. The blood marker is relatively negligible when you factor in things such as the faction medkit axis and a war profit, but is still at least worth recognizing as a threat in dicier circumstances. Grand Anchorite is basically just allows you to keep your Anchorite from getting clogged up by low value meat shields on the way to juicier targets, and specifically against the Heretic Priest makes you immune to the classic force move out of melee for free attack strategy. Extending retreat to not just the standard move action actually helps significantly as it allows you to charge a new target while still engaged with others, meaning you don't waste turns attempting to disengage from fodder. Piston Legs is just a worse trample from the Iron Sultan's Brazen Bull. Exact same restrictions, but the attack doesn't ignore armor. An extra attack is of course nice for finishing off stubborn foes. Hallowed Anchorite is the one that benefits most from these things being equipment, as once you manage to promote the shrine with it, you can replace it with something you actually want, and move this to your other shrine that you want to get promoted. Getting Elite can massively increase the effectiveness of your shrine since a lot of campaign skills are extremely powerful, especially on units that were never meant to have access to them. Increase in post-game survival chance is also always appreciated on expensive units. Do remember though that this does require you to still get a promotion roll, which you can go many games easily without getting. Lastly is the Wrathful Cherub face, one of my personal favorites. This forces opponents that aren't immune to fear to attempt a retreat action. This translates into a lot of free extra attacks depending on the faction. You're out of luck against Black Grail. And extra activations of the Catherine Wheel are worth their weight in gold, often resulting in downstates if not death. Of course, since it doesn't mandate this retreat at the start of the turn, they can still attempt to kill said shrine as normal, but if you run your shrine into units that don't want to be in melee, this basically just translates into a free kill attempt on them. So try to get engaged in melee with as many units as possible when running this to maximize effectiveness. Finally, moving on to Warband construction. With this list, we get to exactly 700 ducats. This build gets you 2 shrines at the start without completely destroying your action economy. It is a build around the idea of setting up extremely consistent kills from your shrines in War Profit by making use of a Pilgrim exclusive weapon, the Molotov, which, if it hits, will most of the time generate 2 blood markers, which when used on weapons such as the Catherine Wheel, will crack even the toughest units. So, in order to keep our unit numbers up, I've managed to fit 3 Trench Pilgrims at 123 ducats for all 3. These are dirt cheap units, but are surprisingly intimidating due to how massively they can indirectly buff the powerhouse units of this warband. At 40 ducats, we get a Molotov and a Flail for all of them. One of them gets a spare Trench Club just to do the spare 3 ducats laying around at the end of everything. The Flail is an extremely cheap weapon for the benefit of giving your Trench Pilgrims a +1 melee stat, making them significantly better than their counterparts in melee, sans Yoke Fiends. While having a good chance against other unarmored infantry, these Trench Pilgrims are actually ideally going to focus on attacking units like mechanized heavy infantry, where getting a hit with the Molotov and charging in with the Flail gives the potential 3 blood markers on the target, which can then be followed up by an anti-tank hammer or Catherine Wheel, which is likely to end up killing. Likely to die though, especially as they have effectively no range to speak of, as the Molotov is even shorter range than grenades. You'll have to play it risky and make good use of the War Prophet's loudspeakers to get them just close enough to begin lobbing. The only survivability these units have is by getting into melee to avoid ranged shots. The War Prophet is very standard, with the exception that the automatic rifle gives her a decent way of taking out light units at range as the warband pushes up the board. If wanted, can drop the auto rifle to save a good amount of ducats to spend on either the Pilgrims or the Martyrdom pills. She of course wields the anti-tank hammer, as her innate high stats and non-risky blood marker removal is a great synergy with the weapon. If you do land a hammer hit on a unit that's been successfully Molotoved, we're looking at 80% chance of killing any unit without special modifiers such as the Hell Knight. Crucially, she really helps your shrines and other pilgrims move up the board quicker due to loudspeakers, which, due to the 6-inch range on Molotovs, is even more vital to your strategy than usual. If you end up getting Strength with Samson during the campaign, grabbing an SMG and shield will massively increase her survivability without destroying her ranged performance. The first and more expensive of our 2 Anchorites is wielding the autocannon, for reasons already discussed about this weapon. Taking Sacred Geometry is mandatory for this build since we actually want to be hitting our shots even at long range or with cover involved. If you can get an elevated position, even targets at long range and in cover are likely to come away with at least 1 hit, which with an innate +1 injury dice has a good chance of downing targets. You can use this unit to control huge swaths of the board, as even well-armored units will be wary of entering its line of sight, as any blood markers they have can easily translate into death once the cannon gets going. Having Tough on an Armor 3 unit means it can pretty confidently hold down a lane and require concentrated firepower to deal with. But as most AP options require close range, this means the approach to use said weapons on it will be fraught with peril. The autocannon outranges all the popular ranged AP weapons such as artillery witches, anti-material rifles, and marauds, so you can actually afford to have this unit spawn as far back possible in order to be safe and force the opponent to move these cornerstone units closer to attempt to kill, which of course means closer to the rest of your warband, which prefers them to be in melee range. Depending on the map and objective type, this singular unit can warp your entire opponent's strategy around it. As with the War Prophet, use your pilgrims to set up blood markers to cash in with the devastating autocannon follow-up. Now our second shrine is equipped with the standard weapon loadout, just with some upgrades to improve their performance. The Holy Diesel engine drastically increases our dash chances, allowing the shrine to get into charge range usually a whole turn earlier, which usually translates into getting an entire extra kill. If you've managed to get a single Molotov hit in, then the 2 blood markers from that will turn a Catherine wheel hit into a very consistent kill tool of pretty much anything, not even requiring a downed opponent. The size of the shrine should not be discounted, as it allows you to more feasibly get into melee with multiple units at the same time, which means the mace offhand attack can be used on the less durable target if the wheel kills the first. We also take the Raffle Cherub face, as it has a reliable opportunity to give it an extra attack activations to the shrine. Depending on the warband, fear immunity is not too common, especially on the grunts, meaning that if you got it into melee with multiple units, you can focus solely on the threatening one and let the attack of opportunity deal with the leftovers fairly reliably. As you can tell at this point, you're playing this shrine similar to standard, but with a stronger incentive to get sandwiched between multiple units in order to maximize efficiency. You can also significantly mess up your opponent's activation order with the threat of the Cherub's face due to the fear of wasting an activation on a unit that's just going to commit suicide anyways. So in summary, we've got a fairly small list with a focus, as mentioned, on having the cheap pilgrims set up devastating attacks for the other 3 units. First off, we've got the War Prophet coming in at 202 ducats, wielding anti-tank hammer, reinforced armor, iron caparot, and the automatic rifle. Caparot is important here since we can't really afford to be missing attacks with our low action economy on expensive units. The melee Anchorite Shrine comes in at 170 ducats with the 2 upgrades as previously mentioned. The autocannon Anchorite Shrine with Sacred Geometry comes in 205 ducats, and then finally the 3 trench pilgrims, 2 of them at 40, and the last one getting 43 ducats due to the extra trench club. This comes out to an even 700 ducats. In future games, picking up the Cascader as soon as possible is your priority, and then filling in or buffing up your fodder units for further setup. And that's that. Sorry again for how late this one was, very busy with work and such. Let me know if it's a specific variant you'd like me to take a look at. Thanks for watching if you made it this far.